Okay, we are continuing our tour of the nations of Europe during the time period 1450 to 1750, and now it's time to get into France and their ability to start to rise to become a world power. Now, we need to talk about the Valois family for a while, and in France and after the Hundred Years' War, the Valois were in power and things were going pretty well until King Henry II, who you see there on the left, dies accidentally in some type of hunting or other accident. It happens. So, okay, no big deal. His son, Francis, is 15 years old. It's okay. We'll get going. He dies. That doesn't really help. And that leaves Charles the Ninth in charge as the king with his mother, Catherine de' Medici, the scary woman in black, because she always wore black and she was legitimately scary, as the regent of England, but or not of England, of France, but she kind of was the queen. She pretty much ran the show. Very opportunistic woman. Charles basically did everything she said, and France was kind of at a little bit of a tipping point here. Now, the thing was that other basic families really saw an opportunity to get involved here and perhaps get the throne back. And what you end up getting was the French Civil War, which took place in 1562. Basically, what you have here are Huguenot Protestants coming from the Bourbon family fighting against the Catholic nobles, um, mainly the Guy. Now, what complicates this is that Charles the Ninth dies, regular causes, and then you have his brother Henry the Third, who is supposed to take the throne. Well, he's not supposed to, he does, although Catherine is still kind of in charge. And there's lots of bloody fighting because we're going to make it not only about gaining the throne, but religion, and it's back and forth until finally people are like, maybe we don't want to kill each other from now on. So what they figure out is the Guy and the Bourbon are going to make a deal. And here's how the deal is supposed to happen. Is that Henry Navarre, who was the leader of the Bourbon family, was to be engaged to Henry's sister, Henry III's sister, Marguerite, and basically become the next king, uniting the families. Seemed like it would really work. Mom, really not a fan of this, and so what you ended up happening is the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. So at the wedding on August 25th, 1572, craziness, Catherine has her men basically surround the church and arrange for a massive assassination of Henry of Bourbon, all his retainers, and as many Protestants as she could kill everywhere. And basically, this was just, like a massive death squad attack. However, Henry is able to escape. I'm not even kidding, by diving out of a window. We have like 10 sources that talk about that. Marguerite also escapes, but during the wedding, I mean, imagine this, guys. You're about to get married, and then your mother in law kills you. The aftermath was just devastating. 10,000 Huguenots were killed, but despite the scary lady in black, as you see her there in this picture of, all the people dead, and somehow before they died, they ripped their clothes off. I'm not sure why. But especially this guy, I don't even know what's going on over here. And then this guy lost his pants. Sure. But nonetheless, Henry and Marguerite are able to escape. It seemed they genuinely loved each other. And as a result, Henry will become the king. Because shortly after Henry is married to Marguerite, Henry III of England dies, there's nobody left, so he becomes the king and Catherine's dead anyway. He is going to rule from 1589 to 1610, and he's going to be really important because he is able to get France back to being France. Prior to Henry's rule, because of the Protestant Reformation, and we already talked about this a little bit, France had just been racked by these wars between the Huguenots and the Catholics. So what Henry's going to do is two things. Because religion was so important to the throne or the king of England, or not of England, I'm sorry, France, they are going to get him to convert to Catholicism. Good deal. Now, the Huguenots get a little worried about this, but that's okay because he passes the Edict of Nantes, which gives Huguenots the rights to worship freely and publicly. It also gives them the same political rights as Catholics, and it's going to allow France to just like chill and get themselves together again. Remember, at this point, they're missing out on New World things. The Spanish are going crazy. The English are kind of growing, and they're kind of waiting in the wings here. Eventually, for him, he is assassinated, shockingly enough, although it took them 20 times to kill him. But it didn't matter. Everything was set up, and then his son would take control after him. And that son was Louis the 13th. And Louis the 13th ruled from 1610 to 1643. I mean, look at him on the left here. I mean, dapper. He's got the hip pointing attitude. I don't know what these. I don't know. And then the boots and sure, but he's being crowned by an angel who, for some reason, is half topless. But that's okay. He's in charge now. He is the son of Henry of Navarre, but he is not really his dad. He is not strong at all. He is very, very weak, but he had a very, very strong advisor, a man on the right now, the Cardinal Richelieu. And the Cardinal Richelieu, I think, kind of liked being in power because he really was the guy in charge of Louis, but looked at this as an opportunity now that Henry IV had solidified France and calmed it down to strengthen the power of the throne. And what he's really going to do is strengthen the monarchy. He is going to destroy all fortified castles outside of Paris, he being Richelieu, but then Louis would say what to do. He will actually make the king famous by letting the commoners see him and understand that he's this great guy and things like that. They're going to develop a large standing army. In fact, it'll be a few 100,000 men, and everything goes through the king. We're not going to let ministers run anything. We're not going to let nobles run anything. It's all going to be him. Now, what's going to help is the economic plans that they do. They are going to get involved in massive overseas trade. And actually, what they will end up doing is be rewarding wealthy merchants by actually giving them titles, which is a big deal because you can only do business in France if you had a title. And then nobles get rewards and tax breaks and even more land in France for participating in developing overseas trade. They're going to start to get involved in exploration in places like Canada and the Mississippi River. And everything is going to focus on growing the economy and growing the power of the king. And what that will lead to is perhaps the most dynamic of the monarchs of this age, King Louis XIV, who, as you can see there, ruled for an incredibly long time from 1654 to 1715. Now, granted, he took the throne when he was 5, but after having a regent for a little while, when he is 22, he really takes over. To give you an idea of how big he was on this idea of absolute monarchy and the king rules everything, his most famous quote is, "I am the state." And he really furthers centralized power. He has a cool big sword and some crazy cape. I don't even know what this stuff is. But what he is going to do is that he is focusing on making sure the king is super strong and having the state run everything. Nothing in France was that was important to infrastructure, if you will, was run by private people. Canals, roads, all the taxes. No longer do you have these independent taxmen. Everybody is accountable to the state. Businesses are regulated through the states. You could still have private business, but you were regulated, kind of what we see today. He's really, really effective at doing that. Now, he also has to deal with the nobles. So what he does for that is the only way nobles could advance was getting different types of titles from the king. He could also remove nobility and take your title if you screwed up, which he would do a lot. Then he would get the nobles to basically plot against each other and stay out of his way, because remember, feudalism, if there was a country where feudalism was just so ingrained to the core, it really was France. So these nobles for centuries have been used to kind of doing whatever they want to. So Louis very brilliantly is able to limit and then get them to really kind of fight against each other, and it's just sheer brilliance. Um, and in the end, it ends up getting them to be much weaker. Then he strengthens his own position by expanding the army. Under its height, it will reach 400,000 men. Nobles are no longer allowed to raise their own armies as well. That's always a good decision. But ranks and promotions are all based on merit. A commoner could rise up and become a high end general, and many of the generals, actually, interestingly enough, were be able to gain titles as well. And so this is going to be important because, interestingly enough, like when we see the French Revolution, when France is racked by just like utter craziness, yet their army still keeps winning, and they get steady pay, they get uniforms, they get food. And under Louis, France becomes just a juggernaut. They're an economic juggernaut, and now they're a military juggernaut. Their king also thought he was a juggernaut. As you could see there on the bottom left, he called himself the Sun King because the world revolved around him. Now, he does go after the Huguenots, though. He was uber Catholic. He repealed the Edict of Nantes. The Huguenots had no rights. This would cause wars which would hurt France after his reign, but we'll get there. Now, he does do lots of war, but before that, let's talk about his trade. His trade was incredibly successful. He is going to be aided by a man by the name of Jean Colbert, who was his finance minister. They are going to trade anywhere and everywhere. They develop manufacturing, and French goods become some of the highest quality goods. I mean, think about it today. If you have a friend of yours that's a girl and says she has a dress, that's all good. But if she says she has a dress from France, it's like the greatest thing ever because they make good stuff. He does tax all classes. He taxes the nobility just a little bit, and then they'll change that. But he really expands roads, canals, ships, internal travel. It's incredible. He also, at the same time, will encourage external competition. They do a lot of trade, and so by bringing in external competition, it makes the internal businesses even better, and France is booming. The problem with him is he fights a lot. If you look at this map, he was basically at war from 1667 to 1697. I mean, he fights England and Prussia and the Holy Roman Empire and the Austrians and even the Italians a little bit. He'll also try to fight the Spanish. Probably the biggest war he fought was the War of Spanish Succession, in which he tried to get his son married to the heir of the throne of Spain, and then eventually would be able to get all of Spain's New World holdings, and basically the rest of Europe rose up and crushed him. He did have a lot of attitude because his best line ever was that how could, after he lost the War of Spanish Succession, which he would lose, how could God do this to me when all that I have done for him? But nonetheless, he really makes them a power. The problem with Louis is he does set them up for revolution. He spends a tremendous amount of money in class. I'm going to show you his house that he builds, which actually bankrupted France. I'm not even kidding because he spent so much money. He actually burned all the financial records of how much it cost. He does further some divisions between the upper and the lower classes, even though he is taxing the upper class. Really, the only guys that could ever still do anything in France, you had to have a title. And the wars would also hurt the economy. But none of this would really happen until after his reign. And then the revolutions and things like that would happen later on under his son and grandson. So, nonetheless, France goes from kind of, again, this feudal thing after the Hundred Years' War to go on a run. And France today is still a very, very legit nation, and it really got all going during this time period. Okay, get your comments and questions, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.